He was standing in the doorway of my beautiful new California home, a smug, triumphant smile on his handsome face. He had just finished telling me how he had reinvested my entire life savings into an account I could no longer access. He thought he had won. He thought I was just another lonely, wealthy widow, easily fooled by his charm. He looked at my calm face and mistook it for shock, for defeat. He had no idea I had spent 30 years as a diplomat, working in the quiet, shadowy world of international intelligence. As he turned to leave, I smiled, a real smile for the first time in months, and said, "The money is just money, Julian. But what I'd be worried about if I were you is which one of my old friends read our chats. Was it the CIA, the NSA, or my personal favorite, the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Unit? You still don't know which agency read your chats." This is the story of a man who thought he had conned a diplomat and a woman who was about to give him a masterclass in geopolitical leverage. If you believe that information is the most dangerous weapon of all, subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because you are about to witness a man's life get permanently and officially redacted. Part 1. The scent of night-blooming jasmine, a scent I was still learning to associate with my new home in Santa Barbara, hung heavy in the evening air. It was supposed to be the scent of my peaceful final chapter. Instead, it was now the backdrop for the most profound betrayal of my life. Julian stood silhouetted in the arched doorway that led to my patio, the last rays of a perfect California sunset catching the edge of his expensive watch. He had just finished a 10-minute monologue, a speech delivered with the smooth, practiced ease of a corporate raider announcing a successful, hostile takeover. My money, the entirety of my savings, the nest egg I had so carefully cultivated over a 30-year career in the State Department, was gone. "It's not gone, Isabel," he had corrected, his voice a silken, condescending purr. "It's been reinvested. A high-yield offshore opportunity. The paperwork is complex. It's an irrevocable trust. For your protection. For my protection." He had taken my life savings and wrapped the theft in the language of concern. I just sat in my armchair, my hands resting in my lap, and I listened. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did what I had been trained to do for 3 decades in tense, high-stakes negotiations in embassies and backrooms around the world. I observed, I analyzed, and I let my opponent reveal his entire strategy. I had met him 3 months ago. It was at a charity fundraiser for the local art museum, one of my first forays into the social life of my new city. I had just moved here from the cold, sharp-edged world of Washington, D.C., a world of power, secrets, and a constant, low-grade paranoia. Santa Barbara was supposed to be my escape, a place of sun, art, and quiet anonymity. He had approached me with a glass of champagne and a perfect, disarming smile. He was Julian Croft, an independent investment consultant. He was handsome, he was charming, and he was, to my lonely, recently retired soul, a breath of fresh, Californian air. He was not like the guarded, calculating men of D.C. He was open, he was fun, he was full of life. His pursuit was a masterclass in patient, strategic seduction. It was not the clumsy, rushed advance of a younger man. It was a campaign, executed with the precision of a military operation. He began by making himself indispensable in the small, practical matters of my new life. He noticed the slight tremor in my old Land Rover and insisted on taking me to a friend of his at a dealership, where he negotiated a fantastic deal on a new, reliable car, handling all the paperwork, making the entire stressful process feel effortless. He had found a vulnerability, my lack of knowledge about cars, and had presented himself as the competent, trustworthy solution. He was not just charming, he was useful. He had slowly, skillfully, woven himself into the fabric of my social world. He introduced me to his friends, a rotating cast of handsome, vaguely successful men and beautifully preserved women who all seemed to adulate him. They would meet for brunch at the Four Seasons Biltmore or for sunset cocktails at a private club in Montecito. They would listen, enraptured, as Julian told his stories of market conquests. I see now that they were not friends. They were props, a carefully curated audience designed to reinforce his image of success and to make me, the newcomer, feel privileged to be included in his exclusive circle. He was creating a bubble, a warm, golden, and completely artificial world where he was the sun, and I was his favored planet. And then, when the seduction was complete, he made his move. It was on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, at his suggestion, as we walked along Butterfly Beach. He spoke not of my money, but of my future. "Isabel," he had said, his voice a low, concerned murmur as we watched the waves, "you have spent your entire life serving your country. Now, it's time for your country to serve you." He had talked about my outdated, low-yield government pension, the very symbol of my life of quiet, secure competence. He had reframed it as a cage, a symbol of a small, limited future. He had painted a picture of a different kind of life, a life of true financial freedom, of making my money work for me, of philanthropic endeavors and global travel, untethered by budgetary concerns. He was a master storyteller, and the story he told was of a golden, worry-free, and endlessly exciting retirement. A story that was the perfect antidote to the quiet, lonely future I had been secretly dreading. I, a woman who had spent her life navigating the treacherous currents of international diplomacy, a woman who had been trained to deconstruct narratives and identify the hidden agenda in every word, was a fool. I had let my guard down. For the first time in my adult life, I had willingly suspended my disbelief. I had mistaken his clinical, predatory interest for genuine affection. I had mistaken his intelligence-gathering questions for intimate curiosity. I had wanted, just once, to not be the smartest, most suspicious person in the room. I had wanted, after a lifetime of secrets and shadows, to simply trust someone. And he, a man who could smell that desperate desire like a shark smells blood in the water, had taken that trust and leveraged it to bankrupt me. He saw a lonely, retired diplomat, a woman of means with a quiet, respectable past. He had no idea what that past had really entailed. He had no idea what a retired diplomat, with 30 years of secrets and a global network of very quiet, very dangerous friends, was truly capable of. Part 2. My hidden power was a lifetime spent in the shadows. My official title was Foreign Service Officer, but my real job was in a much quieter, much less public corner of the State Department. I was an intelligence analyst, and for a time, a handler. My specialty was not in politics, but in people. My job was to understand networks, to identify vulnerabilities, to cultivate assets, and to apply leverage. I had spent 30 years in a world where information was the only currency that mattered, and where a single, well-placed secret could be more powerful than an army. I spoke 4 languages. I could read a balance sheet as easily as a poem, and I was trained to spot a lie from 100 paces, even when it was wrapped in a beautiful, charming package. The great tragic irony of my life was that I had let my own loneliness, my own desire for a normal life, blind me to the truth of the man who was sitting in my own living room. I had ignored every single one of the red flags my training was screaming at me. My antagonist, Julian, was a classic con artist, but he was a specific high-end breed. He was not a petty thief. He was a social predator. He moved through the wealthy, insulated communities of coastal California, Santa Barbara, Montecito, Carmel, like a shark moving through a seal rookery. His targets were always the same: women over 50, newly single, financially independent, and, most importantly, women whose professional lives had been spent in fields other than finance. He would learn just enough about their world to sound intelligent, and then he would use his own superior knowledge of the financial world to dazzle and disarm them. He did not just steal their money, he stole their confidence. He made them feel foolish, inadequate, and ultimately complicit in their own ruin. He counted on their shame to keep them silent. My daughter, Anna, was my only real ally, but she was an ocean and a continent away, living a life that was both a product of my own and a reaction against it. She was working for a human rights NGO in Geneva, a brilliant, fiery young lawyer who had taken the diplomatic skills I had taught her and turned them into weapons for the powerless. Where my career had been a game of quiet, pragmatic, and often morally gray compromises in the service of national interest, Hers was a world of black and white conviction, of fighting for the pure, unvarnished truth. She had my intellect, but my late husband's idealism, a combination that made her both formidable and, to me, a constant loving reminder of my own jaded cynicism. I had kept my relationship with Julian a complete secret from her, a significant and telling omission in our almost daily communications. My excuse to myself was that I didn't want her to worry. She had her own battles to fight, her own world of international crises to manage. How could I bother her with my silly, late-in-life romance? But the real reason, the one that festered in a dark, secret corner of my heart, was that I was afraid. I knew her sharp lawyer's mind, a mind that had not been softened by grief or loneliness, would see right through Julian's polished facade. She would ask the hard questions I was deliberately avoiding. She would run a background check. She would deconstruct his charming stories with a ruthless, logical precision. And I wasn't ready to have my beautiful, fragile illusion shattered. I was protecting my fantasy from her reality. Now, sitting in the ruins of that fantasy, the distance that had once been my shield was about to become my greatest asset. My network, the true source of my power, was not in California. It was not a collection of wealthy friends or business contacts. It was a global, invisible web of quiet, powerful people I had spent a lifetime cultivating. It was the former station chief in Berlin who now ran a private security firm that was a front for the agency. It was the financial attaché in Brussels who owed me his career after I had quietly quashed a politically disastrous scandal. It was the NSA analyst, a brilliant young man I had mentored, who now sat in a windowless room in Fort Meade, Maryland, with the ability to track almost any digital signal on the planet. These were not friends in the traditional sense. They were assets. They were allies, bound to me by a shared history of secrets, of favors, of navigating a world where a quiet phone call could be more powerful than a legal decree. Julian, with his petty cons and his brunch club friends, thought he was an operator. He had no idea what a real operator, a woman with a 30-year Rolodex of ghosts and spies, truly looked like. He had just declared war on a woman who had access to her own, private, and completely deniable intelligence agency. Part 3. The moment the door closed behind Julian, the grieving, foolish woman he had just robbed disappeared, and the diplomat, the analyst, the operator, took her place. The conflict was not emotional, it was tactical. He had just declared war, and I was now on a war footing. The first protocol in any crisis is to assess the damage and gather intelligence. The damage was clear. My liquid assets were gone. But what was the intelligence? My smart plan began with a single crucial assumption. Julian was arrogant. He believed he had won. He believed I was a helpless, hysterical woman who would now collapse in a puddle of tears. He would not be expecting a countermove. Not yet. This gave me a window of opportunity. The obstacle was my own home. It was no longer a safe space. I knew enough about his type to know that my communications might be monitored. My laptop, my phone, they were all compromised. I walked out of my house, got in my car, and drove to a small, anonymous public library downtown. I sat at a public computer terminal, a place with no digital connection to my life, and I began my work. I was not a victim seeking help. I was a case officer, opening a file on a new, hostile target. I created a new, encrypted email account under a false name. Then I began to reach out. My first email was not to the police or a lawyer. It was to an old colleague, a man named David who was now a senior director at the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. My second was to a woman named Maria, a former cultural attaché like myself, who now did very quiet, very private security consulting for a firm in Langley, Virginia. My third was to a contact at the NSA. I did not write a long, emotional plea. I wrote a concise, professional intelligence brief. Subject: Unofficial Inquiry Re. U.S. Citizen Julian Croft. I provided his name, his known associates, the name of his fake investment firm, and the details of the fraudulent offshore trust he had created. I ended each email with the same, simple, and for them, deeply significant line. This is a personal matter. I am invoking Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was an old, unspoken agreement among a small group of us from the old days. It was a call to arms, a request for off-the-books, personal assistance, to be used only in the most dire of circumstances. I had not used it in over 20 years. I hit send on the 3 emails, and I knew that in 3 different, very quiet, very powerful offices on the East Coast, alarm bells had just started to ring. The full, terrifying, and completely invisible weight of the U.S. intelligence apparatus was about to pivot and focus on one small-time arrogant con man in Santa Barbara. Part 4. The ticking clock of my operation was Julian's own paranoia. I knew he would not stay in Santa Barbara for long. He would need to move the money, to launder it, to disappear. My intelligence network estimated I had a week, maybe 2, before he would try to make his next move. The subplot of my own emotional state was the most complex variable. I had to maintain my cover. I had to play the part of the devastated, helpless victim. I called Julian the next day, my voice a perfect performance of a trembling, tearful woman. "Julian, I don't understand," I had sobbed. "Please, we need to talk. I need you to explain this to me." He had been dismissive, his voice full of a cold, final pity. "There's nothing to talk about, Isabel. It's done. You need to be a big girl now and accept it." He was cutting the emotional cord, just as I had expected. This was good. It meant he felt secure. It meant he was not expecting a counterattack. The complexity of my plan was immense. I now understood that I had to fight a war on 2 distinct fronts, each requiring a different strategy, a different kind of soldier. The first was the covert front, a war of shadows and information. This was my world. The intelligence gathering was already in motion, my old colleagues handling it with the terrifying, silent efficiency I knew so well. They were the ghosts, the unseen force that would provide the irrefutable and likely illegal evidence. But I knew that evidence, gathered in the dark, could not be used in the light. For that, I needed the second front, the overt, legal war. I needed a player on the ground in California, someone who could operate within the system, someone who could take the fruits of my secret war and turn them into a legitimate public execution. I needed a bulldog. My first and only call was to my daughter, Anna, in Geneva. It was late afternoon for her. I pictured her in her small, cluttered office overlooking the lake, surrounded by files detailing human rights atrocities. My own personal crisis felt so small in comparison. "Anna," I said when she answered, her voice tired but warm, "I need your professional advice. I have a situation." I laid out the facts of the case with the same dispassionate precision I had used in my emails to my network. I stripped the story of its emotion, of my shame, of my heartbreak. I presented it as a legal problem, a clear case of sophisticated financial fraud perpetrated against a vulnerable target. There was a long, heavy silence on the line when I finished. I braced myself for the questions, for the inevitable, "How could you let this happen, Mom?" Instead, the voice that came back was not my daughter's. It was the voice of a cold, furious, and deeply skilled lawyer who had just been presented with the case of her life. The idealist was gone, replaced by a predator. "Okay, Mom," she said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "Okay, he's not just a con man, he's a parasite, and we are going to treat him like one. The DC network is your territory, but you need a local hammer, someone who can make this hurt, publicly. You need a bulldog. I know a guy." The guy was a man named Leo Grossman, a semi-retired, notoriously aggressive ex-federal prosecutor from Los Angeles. He had a reputation for being a legal terrorist, a man who specialized in high-stakes financial fraud cases and who took a particular, gleeful pleasure in destroying arrogant, wealthy men. Anna had worked with him once, on an international human rights case, and knew he was the perfect weapon for this war. "He's expensive, he's difficult, and he's half crazy," she had said. "But he never, ever loses." I met with him the next day in his chaotic, book-strewn office in a nondescript building in LA. He was a small, rumpled man in his late 60s, with the weary eyes of a bloodhound and a cheap cigar clamped in his teeth. He listened to my story without interruption, his eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. I did not tell him about my other investigation, about my friends in the intelligence community. I simply presented him with the clean legal facts of the case as I knew them: the fraudulent trust, the misrepresentation, the theft. When I was finished, he took the cigar out of his mouth and looked at me, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Lady," he had said, his voice a gravelly rasp, "I'm going to take this case, and I'm going to do it on contingency, because I'm going to enjoy taking this son of a bitch's skin and turning it into a very, very expensive pair of shoes." My army was now assembled, the spies, the daughter, and the bulldog, and our target was completely, blissfully unaware that he was already surrounded. Part 5. For a week, my life was a quiet, surreal exercise in compartmentalization. By day, I was the grieving victim, playing my part for Julian and the world. I would take long, sad walks on the beach. I would sit at my favorite cafe, staring blankly into a cup of tea. I knew he was likely having me watched, to make sure I wasn't going to the police. I had to be the picture of a broken, helpless woman. But by night, my quiet, elegant home became a covert operations center. The encrypted emails from my network would arrive, each one a new, devastating piece of the puzzle that was Julian Croft. The information came in a flood. David, from FinCEN, had found him. Julian Croft was not his real name. His name was Jonathan Pike. He had a history of similar schemes in Florida and Arizona, always targeting wealthy, single women. He would build a relationship, co-mingle their assets, and then drain them, using a complex web of offshore accounts. Maria, my friend from Langley, had done a deeper dive. She had found his digital footprint, his real social media, his real life. He had a wife and 2 children in a gated community in Scottsdale. He was not a lone wolf. He was a commuter, a man who treated his life of predatory crime like a 9-to-5 job. The man who had been sleeping in my bed had a family he went home to. The violation was so profound, so complete, that it transcended anger and became a kind of cold, pure, and lethally clear fuel. For a week, my life was a strange, bifurcated existence. By day, I was the perfect, grieving victim, playing my part with an Oscar-worthy performance. I took long, melancholic walks along the bluffs, my face a mask of tragic dignity. I would sit for hours at an outdoor cafe, a book open but unread in my lap, projecting an aura of profound, heartbroken distraction. I knew he was having me watched. It was a standard precaution for a man in his line of work. I had to be the woman he expected me to be, broken, helpless, and utterly defeated. But at night, my quiet, elegant house transformed into a secure communications hub. I would sit in my darkened home office, the only light from the encrypted laptop my network had provided, and I would read the intelligence reports as they came in, a quiet, methodical spider at the center of a growing, invisible web. The information from my old colleagues was a steady, chilling drip. David, from FinCEN, had unraveled his financial network with a speed that was breathtaking. Julian Croft was a ghost, but Jonathan Pike, his real name, had a long, dirty trail. A history of bankruptcies in Florida, a string of lawsuits in Arizona, all quietly settled out of court. Maria, my friend from Langley, had built a psychological profile that was so accurate it made my skin crawl. She had found his digital ghosts, the old social media profiles, the forum posts, the digital breadcrumbs of a life spent preying on the vulnerable. Every report was another layer of his charming facade peeled back, revealing the rotten, decaying core beneath. But it was all circumstantial. It was a history of past crimes, not a smoking gun for this one. The turning point, the moment the war shifted from a strategic containment to a mission of total annihilation, came not with a bang, but with a quiet, unassuming beep from my laptop. It was an email from my contact at the NSA, the brilliant young man I had mentored years ago. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained no text. There was just a single, small, encrypted audio file attached. My hands trembled as I downloaded and decrypted it. I put on a pair of noise-canceling headphones, isolating myself from the quiet, peaceful sounds of my Santa Barbara night, and I pressed play. The first sound was a familiar one, Julian's voice. But it was not the gentle, concerned, and loving voice he used with me. This was his real voice, a smug, arrogant, and deeply ugly drawl, thick with a casual cruelty. He was laughing. "You won't believe this one, honey," he said. An ex-diplomat. Thought she was so smart, so worldly. All it took was a few stories about charity work and a sad face, and she practically begged me to take her money. The easiest one yet. "I'll be home by Friday with the final transfer." And then, another voice. A woman's voice, thin, reedy, and dripping with a greedy impatience. "Just make sure you get it all this time, Johnny." The last one, the one in Palm Beach, she almost got away. I sank back in my chair, the headphones still pressed to my ears. The world a silent, roaring void. It was his wife. They were not just a couple. They were partners. A team. A family business where my heartbreak was a projected quarterly earning. My humiliation a key performance indicator. The intimate, loving world he had built for me, a world I had believed in so completely, was nothing more than a script they had likely rehearsed over their dinner table in Scottsdale. In that single horrifying moment, my mission changed. My heartbreak, my sense of violation, it all burned away. Cauterized by a rage so pure and so absolute, it was almost a religious experience. This was no longer about getting my money back. This was no longer about justice. This was about eradication. I was going to take away their future, all of it. The comfortable life, the gated community, the private schools for their children, the entire rotten world they had built on the wreckage of other women's lives. I was going to burn it to the ground. Part 6. The immediate consequence of that audio file was that the legal case against Julian escalated from a civil fraud case to a federal criminal conspiracy. Racketeering, money laundering, wire fraud. The charges were immense. My L.A. bulldog of a lawyer was practically salivating when I played him the recording. He immediately took the evidence to the U.S. Attorney's Office. The repercussion for Julian and his wife was that their quiet, profitable life of crime was about to be invaded by the full, terrifying force of the federal government. They had no idea. They were still living in their bubble of arrogant security in Scottsdale, waiting for the final big score. My role in this new, escalated phase was critical. The feds wanted to catch him not just with the evidence of past crimes, but in the act of committing the final one. The transfer of my money from his initial offshore holding account to his long-term, untraceable accounts. The anointing of my new role came during a secure, multi-agency conference call that felt as serious as any national security briefing I had ever been a part of. On the line was my daughter Anna from Geneva, my lawyer Leo from L.A., and a grim-faced, anonymous federal prosecutor from the U.S. Attorney's Office. "Ms. Rossi," the prosecutor's voice had crackled, devoid of any emotion. "Your evidence is compelling. The recording is a confession. But to build an airtight case for a criminal conspiracy and interstate wire fraud, we need to catch him in the act of laundering your money. We need to tie him actively to the final transfer. The only way to do that is to make him believe he's still in control. We need you to re-establish contact. We need you to play the victim one last time." The request landed like a stone in my gut. After everything, after the cold, hard proof of his monstrous betrayal, they were asking me to go back into the cage with the animal. They were asking me to willingly subject myself to his voice again, to his lies, to his false sympathy. It was the most repulsive, most violating thing I could possibly imagine. A part of me, the proud, wounded part, wanted to scream, to refuse. I had done my part. I had given them the evidence. Why did I have to be the one to suffer more? I looked across my living room at Anna, who I had put on speakerphone. She was watching me, her lawyer's face a mask of professional calm, but her daughter's eyes full of a deep, protective pain. She knew what this would cost me. "It's your call, Mom," she said softly. "You don't have to do this. There are other ways." But we both knew she was lying. This was the cleanest, most direct path. This was the kill shot. This was the only way to ensure he and his wife were put away for a very, very long time. I thought about the sound of his wife's voice on that recording, her thin, greedy impatience. I thought about the one in Palm Beach, who had almost got away. I was not just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for her. I was fighting for all the other women, the ones I didn't even know, the ones who would come after me if I did nothing. I took a deep, shuddering breath and straightened my back. The diplomat, the operator, the woman who had sacrificed her own comfort for a greater strategic objective countless times, took control. "I'll do it," I said, my voice quiet, but firm. "What's the script?" The script was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, crafted by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. It was designed to play on his ego, his arrogance, and his contempt for me. I had to be the desperate, broken, and slightly pathetic victim, making one last, hopeless plea for mercy. After the call, I sat on my couch for a full hour, my hands shaking, before I could even pick up my phone. It felt like picking up a venomous snake. My fingers trembled as I typed the words, each one a small, sharp shard of glass in my soul. "Julian, please, I am begging you." The words felt like a betrayal of the strong woman I was, but I knew they were a necessary weapon. "Don't leave me with nothing. Just give me something back. Enough to live on." The lie was agonizing. "I won't go to the police. I swear. I am too ashamed." That part, at least, felt horribly true. I hit send, my whole body recoiling as if from a physical blow. I was no longer just the bait in the trap. I was the Judas goat, willingly putting the bell around my own neck, leading the wolf and his entire ravenous pack to the slaughter. Part 7. His reply came a day later. It was a masterpiece of condescending cruelty. "Isabel, you are a sweet woman, but you are a terrible investor. The money is gone. That's the risk of the game. My advice? Sell your pretty house. Downsize. You'll be fine." He was not just a thief. He was a sadist. He was enjoying my pain. That single text was the final, clarifying absolution of any lingering guilt I might have had. My growth was in the cold, professional detachment I was now able to access. I had to overcome the visceral, emotional reaction and see his message for what it was, a tactical error. He was so confident, so dismissive of me as a threat, that he had just admitted, in writing, that the money was gone. It was a confession. I forwarded it to my lawyer and to the U.S. attorney. My growth, in the wake of that repulsive text message, was not a gentle blossoming. It was a tempering, a process of my old, soft, civilian self being burned away in a crucible of controlled rage, leaving behind the hard, sharp, and functional steel of the operative I used to be. The challenge was no longer an emotional one. I had compartmentalized my pain, filed it away under case file. Pike, Jonathan. The new challenge was to earn my place at the table, not as the victim they were protecting, but as a strategic asset they could not afford to ignore. My transformation from victim to operator was now complete, and it was formalized in a secure conference call that changed the entire dynamic of the investigation. On the line were the lead federal prosecutor, 2 FBI agents, my lawyer Leo, and my daughter Anna. The feds were laying out their plan, a standard by-the-book digital surveillance operation. They would watch his accounts, wait for him to move the money, and then trace it. It was a solid plan. It was also a slow plan, a plan that gave him too much control. "It won't work," I said, my voice cutting through the technical jargon. The line went silent. "Excuse me, Ms. Rossi?" the prosecutor asked, his voice dripping with the condescending patience of a man speaking to a civilian. "I'm not sure you understand the complexities of—" "I understand that you are playing defense," I interrupted, my tone respectful but firm, the same tone I had used with countless arrogant ambassadors. "You are waiting for him to act. A man like this, a narcissist, he believes he is smarter than you. If he senses a trap, he will simply let the money sit. He will wait you out. You cannot be reactive. You must be proactive. You must force his hand." I spent the next 20 minutes laying out a psychological profile of Julian, or Jonathan, as I now thought of him, that was more detailed and insightful than anything the FBI's behavioral unit could have produced. I knew how he thought. I knew his triggers. "He is not afraid of the law," I explained. "He sees it as a system to be manipulated. He is, however, terrified of being outsmarted. He is terrified of his reputation being tarnished before he has a chance to cash out. His ego is not just a character flaw, it is his primary vulnerability. That is the leverage point we need to exploit. I proposed a new plan, a proactive plan, a sting. We would not wait for him to move the money. We would create a scenario so terrifying, so plausible, that it would force him to move it, and to move it quickly, into a trap of our own design. There was another silence on the line, but this one was different. It was the silence of a room full of professionals who were suddenly seeing the victim in a completely new light. It was my daughter who spoke first, her voice full of a proud, almost laughing respect. "Gentlemen," she said, "I believe my mother has just become the lead strategist on this case." From that moment on, I was no longer just a source of information. I was a fully integrated member of the strategic team. My quiet Santa Barbara home, the scene of the crime, became the unofficial West Coast Command Center for the final act of justice. I spent hours on secure conference calls, not as a witness, but as a consultant, my unique, intimate knowledge of the target's psychology proving to be the most valuable asset in their arsenal. We were no longer just building a case. We were setting an intricate, psychologically tailored trap, and I was the one who knew the bait better than anyone. I knew his arrogance, I knew his greed, and I knew exactly what it would take to make him walk right into it. Part 8. Our plan, which I had helped to devise, was a work of beautiful, intricate deception. It was a classic intelligence operation, a sting. We were going to make Julian believe that I, in my desperation, had found a loophole in our agreement. My lawyer, on my behalf, sent a formal, threatening legal letter to Julian's fake investment firm. The letter was a work of fiction. It claimed that because some of the initial funds I had invested were from a protected, inherited trust, a complete lie, that he was in violation of a specific, obscure SEC regulation. It claimed that I was about to file an injunction that would freeze not just our transaction, but his entire known financial network. It was a legal scare tactic designed to panic him, and panic him it did. We knew, because my old friends were listening, that he made a series of frantic phone calls to his own, less than brilliant lawyer. He was spooked. Then I made the final move. I called him. My voice was no longer pleading. It was cold, and it was hard. "You made a mistake, Julian," I said. "You thought I was a fool. You are about to find out how wrong you are. But I will give you one way out, a quiet way. Wire half the money back to my account by tomorrow at noon, and I will make this all go away. If you don't, I will unleash a storm you cannot even begin to imagine." Our final plan, hammered out over a series of encrypted late-night video calls, was a work of art, a beautiful, intricate piece of psychological warfare that I was proud to call my masterpiece. It was a classic, false flag operation, a strategy I had seen used to perfection in my years in the service. We were going to create a new, bigger, and more immediate threat. A threat that would make the U.S. government seem like a slow, distant problem. We were going to make Julian believe that a much more dangerous and much more irrational player had just entered the game. The centerpiece of our strategy was a man I knew from my past, a man who owed me a very significant favor. He was a notoriously aggressive and borderline unhinged Israeli private investigator based in London, a man who specialized in recovering assets for wealthy, cheated spouses. He was a pit bull, a man who operated in the legal gray areas and who was utterly terrifying. With a single, untraceable call, I brought him into the play. My bulldog lawyer, Leo Grossman, then drafted the first part of the bait. It was a formal, terrifyingly aggressive legal letter, sent not to Julian, but to his wife's divorce attorney in Scottsdale. The letter, purportedly from a high-powered London law firm, claimed to represent me. It stated that I, Isabel Rossi, had just discovered that the funds Julian had stolen from me were, in fact, marital assets from my divorce, assets that were supposed to be held in a protected trust. This was a lie, of course, but it was a legally complex and brilliant one. It reframed the crime, not as a simple scam against a new victim, but as a violation of a previous high-stakes divorce settlement. The letter claimed that I was about to file an emergency injunction in the UK courts, an injunction that would not just freeze Julian's known assets, but would also target his wife's assets as co-conspirator. We had created a fictional, much more dangerous version of myself, a woman with a team of ruthless international lawyers. The second part of the bait was the escape route. After letting them marinate in that terror for 48 hours, I made my call. My voice was no longer that of a victim. It was the cold, pragmatic voice of a fellow operator. "You have a problem, Julian," I said the moment he answered. "A problem that is much bigger than the FBI. My ex-husband's family. They are not reasonable people. They are coming for you and for your wife. But I am offering you a one-time only way out." I laid out the false choice. "I am about to file a claim that will lock you down for years. But you have a window. I will give you 24 hours to wire half the money back to my account. Not all of it. Half. A settlement. If you do, I will call off my lawyers. If you don't, I will unleash a storm you cannot even begin to imagine." The preparation for the climax was in that single, perfectly crafted lie. We had created a credible, terrifying threat that directly targeted his wife, his greatest vulnerability. And we had offered him a single, desperate-looking escape route that played directly into his own arrogance. We knew his greed would not allow him to simply give half the money back. That was not his style. We knew he would try to outsmart me one last time. He would see the 24-hour window not as a deadline to pay me, but as a deadline to move all the money to a new, deeper, and safer offshore location before my fictional, terrifying injunction hit. And that was the trap. The feds were not just watching his accounts anymore. Working with my old network, they had placed a digital tripwire, a quarantine alert, on every single dollar. The moment he attempted to move the funds to any account other than mine, every single international banking system would light up like a Christmas tree. The funds would be frozen instantly, and his exact location would be pinpointed. He thought he was choosing his escape route. He had no idea he was simply choosing the manner of his own execution. Part 9. The morning of the sting was a study in controlled, quiet tension. My Santa Barbara home, once a symbol of my peaceful retirement, had been transformed into a temporary, high-tech command post. 2 discreet agents from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit were in my home office, their faces illuminated by the glow of multiple laptops. My daughter Anna had flown in from Geneva and sat beside me, her hand a warm, steady presence on my shoulder. I was a civilian observer in the final act of my own vengeance. We were watching a single screen, a piece of software that visualized the global flow of money. It looked like a star chart, a universe of digital transactions, and we were waiting for a single, specific star to move. At 10:15 a.m. it happened. A sudden, bright flare of activity on the screen. "He's moving it," one of the agents said, his voice a low, excited hum. "He's initiating a transfer from the holding account in the Caymans." We watched as the money, my money, began its frantic digital flight. It jumped from the Caymans to a shell account in Cyprus. Then, from Cyprus to a new, previously unknown account in Liechtenstein. He was trying to outrun us. He was trying to be clever, to wash the money through a series of complex, anonymous jurisdictions before my injunction could hit. He thought he was escaping. He had no idea he was running deeper and deeper into a cage. The climax was not in a single moment, but in the slow, inexorable closing of the net. Each transfer, each digital handshake was a new piece of evidence, a new charge of international money laundering being added to his indictment in real time. He was not just moving money. He was writing his own confession, one wire transfer at a time. The final transfer was the one that sealed his fate. He attempted to move the full sum into a personal, numbered account in Switzerland. But my old friend at the Treasury Department, working with his Swiss counterparts, had been waiting. The moment the transfer request hit the Swiss banking system, it was flagged. A legal, international hold was placed on the funds. The money was frozen, mid-flight. The younger of the 2 FBI agents, a woman with a calm, focused energy, pointed to the main screen. "He's in," she said, her voice a low, professional murmur that cut through the silence of my home office. On the screen, a new line of data had appeared. Julian had just logged into the Cayman Islands bank account. The bait was in the water. We were no longer watching an empty ocean. We were watching a shark circle. For a full, agonizing 10 minutes, there was no activity. Just the quiet hum of the computers and the frantic, silent beating of my own heart. I could feel Anna's hand tighten on my shoulder. "He's thinking," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's weighing the odds. Give back half, or risk it all." "He'll risk it all," I whispered back. "His ego won't let him do anything else." And then it began. A new window opened on the screen, a visualization of the transfer protocol. We saw the full amount, every last stolen dollar, being bundled for a wire transfer. "He's not sending it to you, Isabel," the senior agent said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "He's sending it to a new destination." The agent's fingers flew across his keyboard, tracing the digital path. "New beneficiary account is in Liechtenstein. Classic move. He's trying to wash it through a non-cooperative jurisdiction before it disappears for good." Julian had made his choice. He had stepped directly and with an arrogant confidence into the center of our web. The senior agent looked at me, a single, questioning eyebrow raised. "Now?" he asked. It was my call. The trap was ready, but I was the one who had to give the order to spring it. I thought of the sound of his laughter on that recording. I thought of the one in Palm Beach who had almost gotten away. I looked at my daughter, and I gave a single, sharp nod. "Light him up," the agent said into a small microphone on his collar. The screen erupted in a cascade of new information. It was as if a silent, digital bomb had just detonated. The transfer, which had been in progress, froze. The progress bar replaced by a stark red box that read, "Transaction halted. U.S. Treasury enforcement action." On the main map, a new icon popped up, a flashing, angry red dot. It was a GPS marker. The transfer attempt, made from what he thought was a secure, encrypted connection, has been backtraced, the younger agent explained, her voice quick and precise. "The signal is live, and it is originating from a laptop located at a private executive airport in Scottsdale, Arizona. He was on his way to the plane. He was making a run for it." The senior agent was already on his feet, a grim, satisfied smile on his face. He picked up his phone. He didn't dial. He just pressed a single button. "It's a go," he said, his voice calm and utterly final. "He's at the Scottsdale Airfield, South Hangar. Take him." I listened to the quiet, professional command, and I felt not a surge of triumph, but a profound, quiet, and deeply satisfying sense of order being restored. My vengeance was complete. It was a quiet, bloodless, and perfectly executed digital assassination. In his supreme arrogance, he had tried to play a game of shadows with a woman who had spent her entire life commanding them, and the shadows had just answered back. Part 10. The arrests were simultaneous and spectacular. A team of FBI agents intercepted Julian, or Jonathan Pike, on the tarmac in Scottsdale, just as he was about to board a private jet to a non-extradition country. At the same moment, another team raided his home and arrested his wife, who was in the process of shredding documents. The case against them was so overwhelming, so meticulously documented by both my secret network and the subsequent federal investigation, that it was a legal slam dunk. They were convicted on multiple counts of conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering. They lost everything: their house, their cars, their country club memberships. Their perfect, fraudulent life was dismantled, piece by expensive piece. The long-term consequence for the world of high-end financial fraud was a quiet, chilling message. The story of the diplomat's gambit, as it became known in law enforcement circles, was a cautionary tale. A new, powerful, and anonymous source was feeding the government with incredibly accurate information about their hidden world. My money was eventually returned to me, a long and bureaucratic process, but a successful one. The emotional resolution, however, was not in the recovery of my funds. It was in the quiet, profound rediscovery of myself. I had entered my retirement feeling invisible, irrelevant, a ghost of my former self. The battle with Julian had reawakened the woman I had been, the strategist, the analyst, the operator. I was not a victim. I was a force, and I realized with a quiet, thrilling certainty that my work was not yet done. A year later, I was not in my quiet garden in Santa Barbara. I was in a secure, soundproofed room in a building in Langley, Virginia. I had accepted an offer from my old friend, Maria. I was back in the game, not as a full-time officer, but as a consultant, a special advisor for a new task force focused on international financial predators. My first file was on a man who was preying on military widows. I opened the file, and a slow, familiar, and deeply satisfying smile spread across my face. The hunt was on again. The most dangerous predators are the ones who wear the mask of a friend. They prey on our trust, our decency, our desire for connection. This story is a powerful reminder that our own skills, our own life experiences, are our greatest defense. You are not just who you are now. You are the sum of everything you have ever been. And that is a powerful arsenal. What is a skill from your own past that you have found to be unexpectedly powerful in your present? Share your story in the comments below. If this story of a woman who used her secret past to secure her future resonated with you, please like and subscribe.